So we want to promote this book, but you need to be fighting terrorism so we can pitch the media, and then your book will do well. Well, finally I conceded, but having worked in Afghanistan and Pakistan for a while, maybe even here in San Diego, you never settle a deal without driving a hard bargain on the side. So I said, if the hardcover doesn't do well, please change the subtitle to One Man's Mission to Promote Peace One School at a Time. So the hardcover came out March 2006, and for 10 months it didn't do very well. And in February 2007, they changed the subtitle to One Man's Mission to Promote Peace One School at a Time. And now it's been a New York Times bestseller for 145 weeks in a row. Fighting terrorism, or even those who promote terrorism, that is based in fear. But promoting peace is based in hope. And the real enemy we all face, whether it's in Africa or Asia or America, is ignorance. And it's ignorance that breeds hatred. And to overcome ignorance, we need compassion, we need courage, and I think it's also based in education. Well, if you want to label me, I'm a Midwestern or Minnesota Norwegian Lutheran. I was born in '57, but when my parents were sitting in church on a winter Sunday morning, they heard that they needed teachers in a girls' school in Africa. So off we went to Africa, where I grew up for 15 years. My father subsequently decided to start a teaching hospital called the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center. And, oops, sorry. Do you want Patrice? Let's go back here. One other thing I forgot to mention here. Several military commanders have read 3 Cups of Tea. I also had the honor to spend quite a bit of time with them. One of them is General Petraeus, who's our CENTCOM commander. So he read 3 Cups of Tea, and he sent me an email last year, and he said he had 3 points that he had gleaned from the book that he wanted to impart with the troops. Now, being a military commander, he summarized them in 3 bullet points. He said, number 1, we need to listen more. Number 2, we need to have respect. And number 3, that we must build relationships. So today, 3 Cups of Tea now is mandatory reading per Secretary Gates for all senior military commanders. It's also it's mandatory reading for all 2,000 military officers in counterinsurgency training at the Pentagon, and also to all special forces deploying to Afghanistan. And thank you. I'll talk later on, too, about some more military generals and admirals. But one thing I didn't know until a month ago is actually their wives read the book first and said, honey, you ought to check this out. So I want to thank the wives first. Well, I grew up in a beautiful place in Africa. It was a wonderful place to grow up and go to school. And my father worked very hard to get the Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center started. But one thing he always insisted on was having local people in charge. And that didn't go very well sometimes with the Americans or Europeans. They said you need a qualified Westerner to run the hospital. And my father insisted on having an African run the hospital. Finally, the hospital opened up in 1971, and my father got up and gave a little speech. First, he congratulated the local people, and then he said, I have a little prediction to make that in 10 years, all the department heads of the KCMC hospital would be from Tanzania. Well, afterwards, he basically got laid off for saying that and having the audacity to believe that the hospital could be run by local people. So he came back to the States, and my father unfortunately died in 1971 from cancer, in his mid-40s. But we got the annual report 10 years later, and all the department heads were from Tanzania. And even today, 38 years later, all the department heads of Kilimanjaro Christian Medical Center are from Tanzania. And the important lesson is that people can be empowered. And even in a country like Iraq or Afghanistan, it's vital that we have the confidence and the faith, and we know that the people themselves, and especially the elders, can get their people back on their own feet. Well, we came finally back to the States, and I was about 15 years old. I went to high school at St. Paul Central in St. Paul, Minnesota. But my first day in high school, I got beat up. Now, you can see this picture outdates me a little bit here. So if anybody has a picture of St. Paul Central High School, please email it to me, digital. And my first day in high school, I got beat up. The kids put a garbage can over my head. and they taunted me. They said, because I made a mistake and said I'm African, and there was a lot of confusion about that. But you know what? It was the first time in my life that I learned what the word racism meant. It wasn't in Africa, it was here in the U.S. We were very poor, so 4 days after high school, in June of '75, right after the Vietnam War, I did something very unpopular at the time. I joined the U.S. Army. And I did it for 2 reasons. Number 1, to serve my country. Number 2, to get the GI Bill so I could go to college. It was actually in the military where I met young men and women from all across the U.S. It made me appreciate that this is a great country, not because of our commonality, but because of our great diversity. Is there educated boy, educated girl? Did we pass it? Let's go back. Go in reverse here a second. In Africa, I learned a proverb. Now, I can't see very well, so can one of you read this? Okay. Can you stand up and you can read that?
If you educate a boy, you an incredible if you educate a girl, you educate a committee.
Very good. Oh, good job. Thank you. Very good. Thank you. What's your name? Alexis. Very good. Thank you. And if there's one thing that I'd like you to take away tonight, remember this African proverb. So how do the gentlemen here feel about it? How do the women feel about it? Okay. Gentlemen, I think we're a little bit outnumbered here. So Krista was my youngest sister, and she was very special, but it was because she had severe epilepsy. And if you just excuse me a minute, epilepsy is a disease when you have seizures, and sometimes you pass out or your eyes roll back in your head. It's really scary because sometimes you might get a seizure when you're playing or just sitting around. It's a very scary disease. And Krista, she never complained, and she was always inspired. She would spend 2 hours the night before school. She'd get her clothes lined up, get her lunch ready. I'm kind of the 5-minute bed to bus kind of guy. Anyways, in 1992, Krista saw a baseball movie called Field of Dreams, and she was very inspired by that movie. So for her 23rd birthday, she was going to go from the Twin Cities down to Dyersville, Iowa to see where the movie Field of Dreams is filmed. But when my mother went to wake up Krista, July 24th, 92, Krista had died in her sleep from a very massive seizure. Now, we were very devastated. So at the time, I was a graduate student in neurophysiology. I was studying epilepsy. I was also working as a trauma nurse. I also was climbing quite a bit. So I decided to climb K2, the world's second highest mountain. Do you know what the world's highest mountain is? Mount Everest. Very good. Okay. I decided to climb the mountain and put a Krista's amber necklace. This is an amber stone. Do any of you know where amber comes from? Sorry, I like being with kids here.
Frozen tree sap.
Very good, frozen tree sap. Very good. All right, give him a big round. Okay. Thanks for bringing him here. He's the principal. It's petrified or frozen tree sap. That's a great answer. So I was going to put the necklace on top of K2 to honor my sister Krista. Well, finally, a year later, I went to K2, and this is the Karakora mountain range. There are 64 peaks above 23,000 feet high in a 100-mile area. So next time you go down I-5, or maybe if you're flying an F-16, go clock yourself 5 miles and pretend you're going straight up. And that's how high these peaks are.